All right, now the magic trick for this evening is going to be whether or not the camera stays working, because I have re-duct taped it and replaced the cord, and we'll see. So far, so good. At least it's been running for the last 20 minutes without issue, so let's just see how it goes. I hope you're doing well. Things here are nice. It's swelteringly hot in here, so I apologize if I sound already exhausted. It's just, even with like fans and air, it's just nothing circulating, and I'm slow roasting in here like a gentle braise of some kind of meal. But it's okay. We'll get started in, it's in emote only again. All right, you guys are just going to have to bear with me one more second while I do this thing. Really? Every time? All right, hang on. Most irritating thing in the world. I don't know why it does this by default. It's real irritating. Okay. That should do it. I think that'll do it. That should do it. Possible? All right. Good. Okay. Crazy. I don't know why it does that every time. But all right, let's get started, shall we? Thanks for sorry for the delay. It always seems to do that lately. All right, here we go.
All right. Just remember what I've taught you.
What the fuck is that?
Hey, yo.
And hey, look, the camera's working again-ish, kind of, sort of. It's crooked, but let's do that. Better? Yes? No? Kind of? Sort of? I'm not really pleased with it, but it's going to have to be how it is. So, hi. I hope you're doing well. I hope everybody's okay. This is, God, it feels like I've been doing, I've been gone for ages. I had to sit and look at the date 3 times to figure out what's going on, but let's go do the opening. Ladies and gentlemen, guys, gals, non-binary pals, friends, writers, makers, doers, dreamers, planners, plotters, dancers, cheese enthusiasts, mug lovers, anybody who had to unfortunately put on pants today, anybody who's ever looked at a really good sale and then realized they never had enough money to get it even though it was on sale, and it will probably not be on sale again. People who can appreciate a warm loaf of bread, people who can appreciate a really good hot spicy pepper, and most importantly, the comrades. This is the Writer's Chat for July the 13th, and yeah, there's just stuff. And I hope you're doing well. Things are a little chaotic. You'll notice a few changes. First, I want to draw your attention to, where is it? How do I do this without marking across my face? Over there. If you weren't here on Monday, let's just catch you up on a few things. Some things have changed. Everything, or as many things as humanly possible, are going under the John Helps You Write Better banner. So if you go to patreon.com/John Helps You Write Better, just like you went to twitch.tv, John Helps You Write Better. Everything's there. And eventually, There'll be the .com conversion. I haven't finished it yet. It's work. I'm going to keep working on it. Look for that over the next week or so. I really need a weekend to sit down and like do it in mass. But so far, so good. We're making some changes. I hope whatever you're up to, I hope whatever you're doing, it's going well. Somebody wanted me, they left me a note. Hang on, where did I leave this? Here it is. They left me a note. Before I upload the audio to the podcast, which is what I normally do like seconds after we're done here, I'm going to try renaming the file so that it's a little clearer and see if that helps straighten out the, hey, sometimes when you click on the podcast, it plays a different week. We'll find out together if that makes any bit of difference. I don't think it will, but we'll give it a try. But for now, here we are. If you've never been here before, if this is the first time you're checking this out, hi, I'm John. How are you? And it is my pleasure to spend the next 90 minutes to 2 hours answering your questions. I've got a dozen questions from all across social media and people who emailed me and asked me things. And I've got the questions from those people who were here in chat. Actually, chat's over here this week. So, yeah. Let's see what we can do to answer some questions, and let's see what we can do to help people write better and more effectively. Boom. All right. Question number 1. Why is passive voice such a problem for submissions? I don't know how to tell you this, but it's not really. It's a little bit of a problem, but it's not a problem for the reason they tell you it's a problem. I'll clarify. Don't freak out. So passive voice is the idea that there's not enough direct activity or agency with a verb. It's a sort of like, it kind of sort of is a verb. It's a sentence. It's active. It's a sentence in the usually, one of the engaging tenses, but it isn't direct and it isn't clear. Passive voice is a problem when, how do I say this? On its face, publishing wouldn't give a shit about passive voice just happening every once in a while. This is not a thing where it's like, oh my God, there's one instance of passive voice. Burn this manuscript. That's not a thing. That's not how this works, okay? Passive voice, just by existence, is not automatically bad. Very few things in publishing are automatically bad, okay? Passive voice is a problem primarily because when you have a lot of it, when you do it regularly, when you can't seem to not do it, when you just keep doing it even though you swear you're trying to stop doing it, when you swear you're not doing it but you really are, passive voice is a big problem because the more of it that accumulates in your manuscript, the more of it that comes across in all your scenes and all your dialogue, in your exposition, in your narration, in everything, the more often you do it, the less engaged the reader needs to be and has to be in order to follow your story. It's the difference between being really interested in what somebody's listening to or listening to what they're saying, and then somebody who's just kind of like half tuned out, kind of like, oh yeah, wow, yeah. Publishing has a problem with passive voice because it detaches the reader from paying attention. And generally, you're trying to get readers to pay attention all the way through because that's how they buy books. And when you get tagged as a writer who can't really engage the reader's attention, or you get hit as a writer who's like, their writing is weak, you're not going to sell well, either through a publisher or a pimp or on your own, just self-publishing. Passive voice is one of those things that sounds like it's not a problem. And sometimes, here's the wrinkle, sometimes passive voice is the best way to say the thing you're trying to say. And not just in dialogue. But sometimes passive voice is fine. One of those skills you have to hone over time, one of those skills you have to get better with as you're doing whatever it is you're doing, is understanding when it's okay to use passive voice or use a sentence fragment or break a rule of grammar, or use some adverbs, or whatever. Understanding that stuff and knowing when to do it and being able to demonstrate that you can do it on demand. I'm going to put passive voice here but not here, 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 and here. When you're able to be discerning with that stuff, you will do a far better job getting things across. Passive voice is a problem because it generally indicates that a writer does not have command of their craft, and by extension will not hold a reader's attention long term. So a publisher looks at that and goes, if your first 5 pages aren't holding, I'm making a number up, 5, 10, somewhere, if the beginning of your story doesn't hold the reader's attention, they're not going to buy the thing and it's not going to work long term. This is a huge issue. Train it out of you. How you get better at it, how you practice not doing the passive voice, vary your sentence length. Generally shorten your sentence length. That's a great way to practice because it forces more narrative load on the verb. And also try to be more direct with things. Say what did happen. Say what the reader should imagine. Describe it as though the reader is in the room, in the space. Practice that over and over and over. And your passive voice becomes very casual and very, not incidental, but occasional. Let's call it occasional. Like a small table you have snacks on. But other than that, passive voice is one of those things where we're trying writing-wise to not demonstrate that we're bad at writing. We're trying to show quality of craft. And passive voice is one of those things that it's a very small red flag that if you have enough of them, speaks to a greater set of writing craft problems. That's a great first question. On we go to more. How do you write question number 2? How do you write something funny? Okay. We have to have a little sidebar here. So let's come over here for a minute. All right? We're adjourning to my right. Funny is subjective. Okay? There's no universal fit, one size fits all everything that everybody finds funny. And funny to the same degree. Because we can agree on something being funny, but how quantity funny it is really up in the air. How you make something funny comes down to understanding what causes humor in reaction. Because humor is a reaction to circumstance. Humor requires 2 things. At the very least, you can add more to it, but you need 2 things at the base in order for it to really, take off. 1, you need an expectation that you're going to defy, either because you're going to do the opposite or you're going to use something like hyperbole or something to really alter the expectation, but you're going to do something, you're going to say something, you're going to express something that is not what the reader expects contextually. That's the first thing. Second thing, you need to be able to parse a breadth of emotion with a thing. Because remember now, you and I are talking, and if one of us tells a joke, there's loads of different material and elements that I, the listener, listening to your joke, am absorbing in my face for me to understand, oh, that's a joke. I got your body language. I have your tone of voice. I have your mannerisms. I have your pauses and your delays in hearing you say it. I have all those factors that are like a multimedia experience for you to tell me about this joke or whatever it is. In text, you can't provide all those things because it's text. So what you need to do, in addition to being able to defy expectation, is create enough context before and after, and maybe during, but mostly before and after the joke in question, in order for the reader to see that, oh, here's the setup, here's the joke, here's the payoff, here's the situation, here is the setup for everything, here's the situation we're walking into. Now our character is going to have a comedic pratfall, and normally we would see that visually, but since you have a responsibility to produce that visual in my brain as a reader, you have to then describe that visual pratfall rather than just say, it's a pratfall. Detail it. Your ability to understand what that visual should be or what that audio experience should be, what should be heard, That's the sort of thing that helps make something funny. And of course, if you want to ratchet it up and add more funny, you don't necessarily want to add more things. Like, if one thing is funny, 10 things must be 10 times funnier. This is not like an overdose situation. This is more like 10's too much. Don't crowd the joke. Let the context you set up and the expectation you defy work together so that the reader has some kind of humorous reaction. You cannot control what that reaction is going to be. You can't say, be 62% funny or else. You can't. That's not how this works. That's not a thing. But what you can do instead is say, I'm aiming for this ballpark of humor. Get somewhere in there and we're all right. But also remember, not everybody's going to find everything funny, even if you intend it. And you have to know that going into situations. But you write something funny by creating context, defying expectation, and then setting up your payoff. Yeah, that is a mechanical way to describe writing a joke. But for the most part, the joke that exists in your head, because, oh my God, you're laughing. Haha, I've got this thing imagined in my head. If you fail to detail that thing, the scene as it is in your head, so that it is mostly now put into my head verbatim, if that transmission doesn't occur, I'm not going to find it funny. So make sure whatever you're picturing in your head, whatever scene, whatever moment, whatever tone, whatever this, whatever that, do your best. Do your absolute best to get it on the page. As it was here, so it goes there. And then practice and revise and practice and revise over and over and over. I want to pause for 1 second. Thank you so much for resubscribing. I really appreciate it, you guys. And it's good to see you. And it's nice to be back. My camera's tipping dangerously. It's nice to be here. Let's keep marching before I get real self-conscious. Here we go. Question 3, a technical one. How do you outline a webcomic that you want to run for a long time? Okay. We're going to talk about outlining structure now. So this is going to get a little technical. Now, I'm not going to specify comic here. I'm going to talk about long-form outlining for story. Because a comic, the idea of a comic, is just the vehicle for the story. This might as well be chapters in a book. This might as well be blog posts. This might as well be, little skits acted out with your friends. This could be anything. The idea that it's a comic is just how you're presenting it. It does not make it something extra or different just because it's a comic. The same rules apply to all mode of story. So here's how you shape a long-form thing. Whether it's a TV series, whether it's a comic, whether it's a lengthy, multi-part, TikTok video saga thing, whatever it is, here's how you're going to outline it for length and duration. There are 2 major ways to do this. One is slightly more organized on a granular level, a smaller level, and one is sort of organized in the big picture. We're going to start with the small one and then move to the big one. They do overlap, but how they overlap is significant. Here we go. Some people tend to think about comics or books or stories or whatever as coming in certain waves. There is a block of story. Maybe that's an act in a 3-act book. Maybe that's X number of issues in a comic series. Maybe it's X number of blog posts. There is some amount of story, and over the course of the amount of that story, there is a plot unto itself. So let's say you're going to pick a number, right? Let's say you say, 24. You say there are going to be 24 issues, instances, blog posts, chapters, stories, there's going to be 24 instances of my story. I can take now either write 24 individual stories that are separate from each other, but overlap because they involve the same people. Or I can take one plot and break it into 24 constituent pieces. That does not mean that your super big giant A plot with your super big giant super bad guy has to show up in all 24 instances. I mean, you can, but you don't need to. But you find your plot and you figure out how many instances it's going to be. This is, again, the model we're using now. The other version does this differently, but for now, we picked 24. So figure out your plot and break it into your number of pieces. Okay, I know I need this many for the resolution. Let's say 3. So, or 4. Let's use 4. We'll go round numbers. I need 4 for my resolution, so I have 20 left. I know my climax is going to be 2. I don't know. Let's say 2. So now I have 18 left. I know my build up to that climax is going to be maybe 12. So now I've got 6 left. And I know I need 3 for introductions, so I have 3 to play with. 3 introductions, 3 development, big block in the middle, climax, resolution. That's 24. Take that same model, plug in a new plot, make new divisions. That's called episodic serial format. It's the same way that seasons of television work. It's the same way that movies and their sequel work. It's the same way that chapter novels in a series or trilogy work. You have a plot, you divide it over a small space, and then you bring in a new plot when it's time for a new installment. Season 1, here are your episodes. Season 2, here are your episodes, so on and so on and so on. That system works best when you are able to clearly establish a few things. 1, you need a really solid handle on characters because loads of other stuff's going to change. The world's going to change. The bad guys are going to change. The locations are going to change. You need something, and it's generally characters are a safe bet. You need something that the reader or the viewer or the audience or whomever, that the audience can attach to, that the audience can care about, that the audience can say, this thing is always the same as everything else around it changes. Characters are a great choice here because a reader naturally wants to sort of see themselves in the character or invest in the character or root in the character. So if your characters are your base building block, the foundation upon which your whole story sits, then no matter what else you do, so long as you stay true to the character, true to that character's arc, true to that character's growth pattern and trajectory, you can plug in goddamn Martians and bears, and your story is still going to work because you've built around that axis for character. And then once every 24 in our case is done, we will have completed a character arc. Not the character's only character arc forever and ever, just this one. And they've got a major A plot, they've resolved it. Not the only A plot forever, just this one. And then you're going to put in a new one for season 2, for season 3, for season 60, for season whatever. But you're going to need a strong foundation around which a thing that stays the same when everything else changes. It doesn't have to be character, but character is a really, really, really safe bet. You could do it with a plot and just constantly plug in new people, but that requires you to have a really definite handle on what the conflict is and how universal that conflict is. You could do it with a location. This is often how you get television shows that dump in new casts every couple years. There were shows way back in the day. There was a show called ER where you had one cast for like 8 or 9 years. Then all of a sudden people were like, I'm tired of being on this television show. I'm leaving. And then they just started cycling another group of people for another 8 years. And somehow, some way, it still felt more or less the same-ish. But it still held true because the things that didn't change, even though the characters did, even though the time did, they added computers and shit. The things that didn't change were the location. It took place in an ER, an emergency room. And 2, the nature of all the characters, even though the specific people went in and went out. The vibe of the characters, whomever they were, stayed more or less the same. So, first thing you need, something that isn't going to change when everything else does. Second thing you're going to need to be able to generate conflicts without relying solely and only on an external villain, meaning a bad guy, whether that's a big giant monster they have to fight or the evil land developer who's coming to bulldoze the orphanage. Be really careful in how you designate your antagonists over an episodic set of fiction. Because if you keep generating a new bad guy of the month, oh, that's the season 2 antagonist, that's the season 3 antagonist, that's the season 4 antagonist, eventually your audience falls the fuck asleep because you will just be repeating yourself and plugging in the same sort of disposable things. If I might make a criticism of a very popular ongoing television program, if you're not careful in how you frame your antagonists, you will always end up in a situation where the telekinetic girl with the crew cut has to save the day in the 80s. You want to make sure it's more than that. You want to make sure it doesn't always boil down to the same things. Here, let's go one step further. In the Mission Impossible movie series, which has now gone on for more than a decade, in that series, the Mission Impossible team is always getting disavowed, and then they have to sort of earn their way back every goddamn time. They're canceling the program. They're working rogue. They're doing this. They're doing that. But they always end up repeating the same thing, just changing some bells and whistles. Now, there's a question in chat. Can the antagonist be dehydration or starvation? Yes. An antagonist that isn't an external person. An antagonist that's like a force that is not personified. Dehydration, starvation, doubt, guilt, lava, the vacuum of space, anything that is an antagonist but is not a biped, quadruped, etc., is still an antagonist. And you can use that to sort of shake up we always have a villain character. It works. But remember, you don't always want to do the same thing and just put a new hat on it. You go to dehydration or starvation once, that's great, but once you resolve dehydration, starvation, let's say you overcome that as part of your plot, it's unrealistic and unreasonable to expect that all of a sudden, for our next season, our character suddenly forgot to make water. It's a good villain, but you want to have the ability to not just do the same thing over and over. So put it on the list. It's good, but you're going to need multiple varieties here, especially if you're trying to go long-term with this, because you're going to run into a stretch of story and you're going to need an antagonistic force. You're going to need some kind of opposition for our heroes. Otherwise, what are they doing? Why are we staying engaged? Why are we following along? They need that conflict that an antagonist or an antagonistic force can bring. Starvation, dehydration is fantastic. The evil developer who wants to bulldoze the orphanage, great choice. Big giant space monster, delightful. But you can't... How many times is a CEO going to come and bulldoze the orphanage back to back? How many times is there going to be a big giant evil space monster? Maybe you can bump these two things back to back once, right? But they're not going to be like 9 years of evil CEOs all trying to bulldoze this one orphanage. So be judicious, be careful in how you organize your antagonists. Next thing you're going to need. The thing that's going to drive the long-term growth of your story is not the direct conflict in your A-plot. So let's say we are a bunch of heroes. Our bad guy is over there. They're an evil wizard. Sounds good, right? The thing that's making somebody read this story longer than just the first 24 issues or whatever is not the fact that, oh my God, there's a wizard. That's in there. But if you want me to keep reading on up to 25, 26, 56, 75, 100, 130, it can't take me that long to get to the wizard. But what drives a story at length long term is something related to that element of story that doesn't change. So you're what's called a growth trajectory. A growth trajectory is needed for long-term growth. So usually it goes like this. Here's your protagonist. They have an immediate problem that forms their character arc. They really want to be loved. I'm going to make something up. They really want to be loved and believed. So they spend the entire first season, the first series, desperate to have somebody believe in them. At the end of that season, hey, somebody believes in them. They're loved. You've resolved that issue, but now you've opened the door for however many other stories because they solved that issue. So now that I can be believed and loved, now the next series is probably going to be me trying to verify that or see if it applies in new situations. Okay, let's do a different example that's maybe a little clearer. Let's suppose you've got characters who are school age, elementary school, secondary school, something like that. Every season, you see this in television a lot, every season is a year of school. Well, eventually they're going to graduate. Eventually they're going to go from one school to another or from one school to the workforce. That's just aging, right? In order to keep people engaged with that story long term and have it go beyond just, hey, we went through school, now we've graduated, story done, which is a natural stopping point. The trajectory, the growth trajectory for your story can't be limited by that school. It's got to be something innate to the character so that they can still deal with it, fight with it, argue with it, suffer with it in both school and college or university or out in the real world. The more you can speak to that in your character development, the longer term potential you are giving your project. Because if it's just a matter of, gosh, I really hope I learn how to speak good Spanish, well, the minute you start to do that, you've solved your issue. There's no other challenge. So be careful in what challenges your characters, and be careful in how your characters challenge themselves, and be careful with how you shape and frame the duration of story. So that's version number 1. That's a little granular. Now we're going to look at things in bigger, broader, more artsy, let's call it, artsy context. Here, we're going to think big picture first. This is generally done by forming a question, forming a challenge, or forming an idea that you, the writer, want to explore. So this could be something like, let me think of one. Can a vampire survive in current day night shift economy? Can you be a vampire and be a guy who bags groceries at the grocery store? We take this question and we figure out, it's a broad question. These questions are broad by design, but we figure out a situation and a number of situations thereafter where this question comes into play. This is how you also form the basis for procedurals. Can this group of crime-solving people solve this crime? What about that crime? What about that crime? What about that crime? What about that crime? Can this vampire figure out how to hide their vampireness while also working a terrible, crappy job for minimum wage? Well, what about in this circumstance? What about in that circumstance? What about in this one over here? So you've got a broad question that can go on for a very long time, independent of a specific number. And it is until that question is satisfactorily and completely answered that this thing can run. You're not worried so much about growth trajectory as you are the breadth of the question you're posing. Is this a better system? No, it's a different system. This idea of framing a question and then trying to take forever and a fucking day to answer it puts a sort of an emphasis on the universality of the question. Well, can somebody who's harboring a secret maintain that secret as the rest of the world goes on around them, whether they're a vampire or whether they're, secretly, fighting old people in nursing homes or traveling through time or who knows what. The more universal and broad that question, the longer you can mine it for parts long term. Either way, in either of those two models, it still comes down to what's this instance? What's this issue? What's this time? What's this unit of story? And how do I organize it? Is it a scene? Is it multiple scenes? Is it, always a certain number of scenes? It's always 2 scenes in a conflict. It's always an action beat. It's always 2 action beats and a dialogue. I don't know. It's whatever your thing is. Find the formula, find the routine in the production. Every 6th issue is a conversation. I don't know. You'll figure that out. But find the pattern and find the routine, because you'll establish that over the first 10, 15, 20 instances. So then you'll be able to, form a story and keep it moving. The more routine things can be, the easier it's going to be to take this long term, because you're going to set both creative expectation, that's your ability to do the work, and reader expectation. They know what they're getting into. You do not always have to go out of your way to reinvent the wheel and try and make something extra in order for them to constantly be re-engaged. I mean, you could, but that sounds exhausting in the long term. So think about it instead of just, here's what we do. Every 10th thing is a fight, so we build up. Every 20th thing is a big fight. I don't know. But there are patterns that exist in the broadcast of stories. Define yours, and that's going to help frame out the individual pieces so that you can tell the story in more or less the same size slices every time. Some slices can be bigger, some slices can be smaller. That's fine. But you're going to want to create a routine through production. It's just going to make it easier for you to have this thing be viable. I hope that answers your question. If not, well, let me know, and I'll get the legal pad out and I'll start drawing on the screen or something, and we'll really figure out how to have this make sense to you. I'm going to go to the next question, though. While I get a mouthful of water, are there any questions from anybody here in chat? You're very welcome. Questions? Issues? Anything? Else we will march on. One more mouthful of water. All right. Here we go. Next question. Question number 4. A revising question. How do I disguise that I'm writing new material to fill in gaps in between all my already written material? That's a great question. It's a really interesting question. So here's how. If we're talking about literally on the page, what a lot of people end up doing when they realize they have to write a thing to fill a gap, they go to the manuscript, they open the page, they hit the return or the enter key, a fuck ton of times, and then write themselves a note, usually in all caps. Put a scene here where something, this is where the car scene goes, or whatever. They leave themselves a note so that they can go back through and find it. And then they write that thing to satisfy that note in the space where they just hit the enter key a couple times. If that doesn't answer your question, you're probably talking about what are generally editorially referred to as the seams. That's S-E-A-M-S, not S-E-E-M-S. Seam, like the seam in a t-shirt or the seam in clothing. It's where 2 pieces are joined and there's a line of stitching. You can disguise those seams pretty well by doing a few things. 1, try to avoid really jarring gaps. You don't always have to jump time. You don't always have to. I mean, I'm not saying you got to sit down on a Monday and write your whole damn book without stopping. That's not the point. And if you take that away from my thing, you've misunderstood. I'm saying, though, that make sure when you're writing thing A, whatever it is, and then you move to thing B, whatever it is, it naturally makes sense to go from A to B. And the reader's going to be able, via context, follow along from A to B. And it doesn't seem like we've missed something along the way. There's a nice natural fluidity from event to event to event to event all the way through the story. So even if we wrote 2 of those things on Monday and then took a year and a half off, and then on the next Tuesday wrote the next 3 things, and then took another 5 years off and then wrote the next thing, the natural progression seems to persist so that it doesn't seem really jarring. That's more of an abstract structural way. More specifically, what you can do when you go to fill in those gaps, read the thing before the gap, read the thing after the gap, and try to remember / make sure that how you've written those things sounds the same when you go write the scene, when you go write the stuff that's missing. There's nothing worse and nothing more glaringly obvious, and no big giant neon sign indicating, hey, the writer took a break here, when random bits between bigger pieces seem to be better written and better polished because they spent time tinkering, they spent time rewriting it, whatever. You want to make sure it always sounds consistently the same. So this is not the moment to suddenly dazzle everybody with your ability to wield sentence fragments. You should have been doing all this dazzling with your wordcraft throughout. Generally, what I tell clients is this: fill in the gap however you can. So you've got this gap on page 6 and you need another scene. Write the scene. Let it be messy. Let it really stand out. Let it really be jarring. Later in the revising process, go back through, clean up your sentences, polish your word choice, hand it to an editor. Both, ideally. And make sure that it reads smoothly so that it doesn't ultimately matter the amount of chronological time it took you to write or the gaps in your writing or whatever. As long as the structure of the text, the length of the sentences, the complexity of the sentences, the voice you're writing in, all that stuff, the tone, all that, as long as that seems more or less the same, your seam is going to be pretty well hidden. If all of a sudden, for whatever reason, let's say, here's a hypothetical, you start writing a thing and then you go take a class or go to a convention or go to a workshop or something and your mind is blown. And then all of a sudden going forward, you're writing better. Or you wrote the living hell out of your first 15 pages, like you did 25 versions of the first 15 pages. You really, really know that. But then on page 16, you're sort of in new territory and it is very apparent that you have not overdone this. And it's new and it's weird and it's awkward and the writing isn't as sharp and clear. Yeah, that's going to happen. It's not great. These things happen, though, and the best thing you can do about that is go get help to help you smooth out the writing rather than leave the bumps in. Go talk to a writing coach, go talk to an editor, take it to a critique group, maybe all of the above, maybe 2 out of the 3, and overall figure out how to just keep writing relatively consistently in style, and those seams will pretty much disguise themselves even if you pressed enter 65 times, wrote a paragraph, pressed enter 65 times again, and then kept going. Don't worry about what it looks like on the page in terms of spacing and formatting. Worry more about how you're shaping the words and what ideas you're trying to get across to the reader. That's how you disguise the gaps. Everybody, from the shittiest agent / pimp to the most obnoxious stuff shirt, tuck your shirt in publisher, understands that writing is not done in one long stretch. Nobody's, totally getting super jacked up and then spending 4 days just ferociously typing anymore. We are long out of those days. Shit happens. So Don't worry if there's a weird gap or a weird shift. It's also possible that you're overthinking it. But by and large, it's part of an expected publishing process. It can be smoothed out in revision. It can be smoothed out with an editor. It can be smoothed out with a writing coach. It's a fixable problem. Don't panic if you're doing this. Okay? Great question. Question number 5. How long is a trend a trend? And basically that's asking how long does something trend? And the answer is not clear. Trends have expiration dates. Let's start there, okay? So a trend is only popular for some amount of time. Maybe a short amount of time, maybe a long amount of time. The amount of time, though, is not stamped on it. It's not like food that expires in your fridge. A trend is a trend so long as 2 things, maybe 3 things happen. 1, a trend is a trend so long as people are constantly engaging in it. It is a trend so long as sentiment for that engagement remains positive. Everybody still thinks it's cool to do a thing, so they keep doing it. And 3, there is still an audience or a market or somebody paying attention at all to it as an end product. So, here's a trend from my youth. And I know this made a comeback many years later. There were these things called slap bracelets, little pieces of semi-flexible plastic that, were long, and you would take them and whap them on your wrist and they'd wrap around. And it was slightly masochistic. You'd run around and slap, and you could give yourself a decent size, slice, or really aggressively nail somebody. Yeah, slap bands. They were things. And I remember them being very, very popular and very, very sought after in my early teens, I think. Really, really popular. Everybody had to have them and had to have a lot of them. And I don't remember. I had 2 or 3, I think. But I know people who, I remember very clearly a girl in my class had 10. But there were these things. And they were very popular for a while, and everybody really enjoyed them. And yeah, the school, I remember that the teachers and stuff kind of came down on you for slapping them on your wrist instead of paying attention in class. I whatever. But after a while, there was another new thing that came and sort of superseded, kicked the slap bands out of the spotlight. I don't remember if it was Pogs or those little firecrackers that look like sperm that was a little bit of gunpowder and tissue paper, and you'd throw them on bang snaps. You would throw them on the floor and they'd pop. Apparently my early teen years were fairly destructive and slightly violent. I should probably go to therapy about these things. But trends last so long as somebody pays attention, the reception is positive, and there's still an avenue for it. So in writing, for instance, there was a very long-term trend for zombies. You can still write zombies, even if it's not the trend. You can still write a zombie story today. It's totally fine. You could probably even do well with a zombie story now. But it's not the same as when the zombie was the hot thing. That trend lasted a very long time until it got bumped by other stuff. Vampires were replaced by zombies. Zombies were replaced by weird stalkery dudes, stalker thrillers, erotic thriller romances with an aggressive, aggro, violent guy were, followed thereafter. And then, because that's some real creepy, hardcore shit, it swung the hard other way. And for a while, the trend was for really positive, affirming, supportive stories. And then the pandemic happened. And then that sort of cleared the decks because pandemic stories became a trend that's still going, even though people swear up and down or act as though the pandemic has long since stopped. It hasn't stopped. It's not going to stop. It's here because we refuse to take care of it. But a trend stays a trend depending on audience and attention and reception. If you want to make a trend go away, the thing to do is not complain about it on social media. The thing to do is ignore it. There are loads of trends that are little blips on a marketing radar, and then they go away. And then maybe somebody brings it up days, weeks, months, years later. Wow, remember this? And we all have a good chuckle about it, and then we move on with our day. A trend stays a trend so long as there is attention to be given, reception to be discovered, and from a capitalist standpoint, money to be made. In terms of writing, your trends generally tend to be seasonal. They last about at least 4 weeks and usually no more than 30 weeks, most of a year. Very rare are the trends that persist over multiple years. Some trends have a cooling period where they slowly decay over a long period of time, but at their peak, like Beanie Babies or Pokemon, they have a real high surge where, oh my God, this is the thing. And then all of a sudden it's just kind of like, yeah, we're done that weird, strange trip. Like everybody was way into sourdough about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Remember that? Everybody was going fucking bananas for sourdough and sourdough starters and stuff and mold in general. And then like we all got into it and I subscribed to a couple Substacks about it. Next thing I know, then, oh, we're not doing sourdough so much anymore. I still am. It's in the fridge. But okay, we're on to the next thing. You see this also with the popularity of TV shows. Something becomes the hot new show, and then the next big show comes and it brushes the other one away. It happens. But it's all about managing attention and reception. Great question. One more. Ooh, gentle advice. How do you deal with rejection fatigue? If you don't know what rejection fatigue is, it's the idea that you've been rejected some number of times, 1, 2, 10, 100, whatever, some number of times, and you feel absolutely discouraged about it. You can also experience rejection fatigue if all your rejections or a lot of your rejections happen at once. Like, hey, I got 10 rejection letters over this one weekend. Or I got 3 at once or something. That sense of despair, that sense of frustration that makes you not want to keep trying, that's rejection fatigue. When you don't even bother really paying attention to the email because you just know it's going to be a rejection, that's rejection fatigue. It's also called rejection exhaustion. It's the same thing. But here's how you deal with it. Well, you've got a couple options. One, you could give up. You can give up, take a break, take a short break, or just walk away entirely. That's an option. It's not a great option if you're intending to, have a goal where you're a published writer of some kind, but it is an option that will help you deal with it because you'll walk away from it and then over time you will recover. That's an option. Other option, look at what it is that got rejected. Chances are, and this is more for the traditional publishing people, but we'll talk about it in terms of other people too. But for traditional publishing, chances are your manuscript didn't even get read. If your query letter is atrocious, if your query letter is a disaster, it doesn't matter how good the manuscript is. That bad query soured the reader right away. The thing to do, the thing to poke with a stick, the thing to challenge, the thing to change is the query letter first, long before you get to adjusting the manuscript itself. Because if the query letter was bad, nobody's going to read the manuscript no matter what. A bad query will sink a good manuscript. A query letter that's kind of sort of on the fence can be saved by a good manuscript. A great query and a terrible manuscript are a recipe for disaster. So if you're getting a lot of rejection, look at your query. Look at the number of places you're querying because maybe your scope is too narrow. Maybe you've decided I'm only querying to, these 3 people, these 3 businesses, whatever, because, they have, they all swear they put, fresh lime in their water or whatever reason. But if your scope is too narrow and your query was a mess, and you happen to submit things at times where their window is flooded and, you just got lost in the shuffle. That happens. But all those factors get together, you're going to get rejected no matter what. That's not automatically a sign or a reason that, oh my God, you totally failed. You're a bad writer. It's just that given a confluence of other things, your writing didn't stand out enough in a positive way. So you could take a break. You could broaden the scope of your querying. You could change your query, which is what I would recommend you do. Like, start it from scratch, come at it a completely different way. Not just like, I'm going to try 2 new words here. Nuh-uh. Blank page, brand new query from scratch, which is really what you should have been doing this entire time anyway. Anytime you query, make a new query. But let's suppose you're freelancing. Let's suppose you're just trying to go straight and direct into short fiction publishing or anthology writing, and you're just churning and burning stuff. You're just putting stuff out and it's not getting anywhere, and you're writing and submitting and it's getting rejected directly, and you're left with this glut of material that nobody said was good enough to publish on their end. What do? You publish it yourself. You want to deal with rejection fatigue? Eliminate rejection entirely. Publish it yourself. It's not automatically easier, but it's doable. It requires a different set of skills. It requires a different set of muscles. You probably want to talk to an expert or something, a writing coach, an editor, a publisher, somebody who's going to give you the time of day for these things. But it's doable. If you're tired of getting rejected, just go put your stuff out yourself. And if me saying that makes you feel very uncomfortable and very awkward, or that, oh my God, it warps your thinking in terms of what it means to be published, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to upset you or anything, but your incredibly narrow view of the legitimacy of some kind of publishing versus another kind of publishing, or the quality thereof and the difference therein, that's fucking you over. You can self-publish your stuff. Get it edited, get a cover, put it together. You can. Most people don't stop and think that way because that seems like work. But what were you planning on doing if you got traditionally published? You'd still have to market the thing. That book's not going to sell itself, and nobody's going to sell it for you. That's not how this works anymore. So if you want to deal with rejection fatigue really head on, really like grab bulls by horns, such as it is, publish it yourself. But don't discount the idea that you could take a break. Don't discount the idea that the thing being rejected is the query, not the manuscript itself, or the pitch, or both. Probably both. But you can deal with rejection in a very proactive, healthy way without immediately flipping the table and marching away and never being creative again. You don't have to, this isn't like an 11-year-old thing where you can slam the bedroom door and scream at every adult that your life is ruined. You don't have to do that. You can handle this. You can come up with strategies for doing better with this. Okay? Rejection fatigue is temporary. The duration of that temporariness? That's not a word. How long it lasts is up to you. We'll say it that way. Okay? Good question. Any questions? Whew. I had this unbelievably spicy steak sandwich for dinner, and I am chugging water and tea. The tea this week, I'm so glad you asked. The tea this week is Madagascar. I believe it's called Madagascar Canyon. It was a gift from someone. It's not bad. It's actually really good, really, really cold, and slightly watered down because it's very earthy. And it's kind of like drinking lawn clippings, which sometimes can be totally what I want. But given that I stuffed hot peppers in my face for dinner, I'm just trying to get as much liquid in my mouth as possible because I still can't feel the middle of my tongue and the bottom of my lip, which I enjoy because, I'm an addict, and anything that spikes a little bit of pain is also going to spike a little bit of pleasure for me. But hey, at least it means I'm drinking water. So everybody who texts me after a stream or something, how much water did you drink? You drink more water. You need more water. Hey, guess what? I'm drinking water by the liter. I'm doing okay. Other questions? I will probably put the recipe for the dinner on the Discord because it was killer. It was super good, and it was super easy to make. I think it took me like 15 minutes to make, maybe 20. Super easy, delicious. We'll definitely eat it again. Are there any writing, publishing, other questions? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep raving about my dinner, which I'm happy to do, but I'm not entirely sure that's why people subscribe to things. Oh, somebody did ask, will this be up on YouTube? Yep, totally up on YouTube, just per usual. I know it's been a while. Things have been happening. But yeah, this will be up on YouTube tomorrow. Yes, I will post the dinner recipe to Discord. Absolutely. It was very good. It was a thinly sliced marinated steak with pickled onions, pickled jalapenos. Oh, they were good. And then a really nice horseradish sauce. What are some unobvious, love that word, what are some unobvious guidelines for writing middle grade beyond avoiding adult content, naughty words, etc.? Okay, first of all, you can put naughty words in middle grade fiction. It's not the end of the world. Try not to do a lot of it, but much like in a PG-13 movie, you get one good shit or maybe one fuck. You could get one good shit into your middle grade book. It's okay. So unobvious guidelines for middle grade. Here we go. 1, you want to make sure that your A plot, your main plot, has 2 conflicts or more, and that there's one resolution. So you're probably going to want a conflict that doesn't entirely satisfyingly resolve. It's not a cliffhanger, but it's an unresolved. It's called an unresolved climax. It's a fight that gets broken up, and I'll get you next time, says the bully kid to the hero. So that you can have a bigger climax later that does get resolved. You generally want multiple smaller climaxes staggered across the course of the second and second act, climax, even into the third act, depending on how you frame it, so that your major resolution can pay off more satisfyingly because there's more moving parts. So that's item number 1. Item number 2, make sure in your first act for middle grade, you get done with the introductions quickly. That doesn't mean skimp on them, but do not drag them out the way we normally can in adult fiction. In middle grade, mostly as a function of it being just a short section of text, middle grade books are short. You want to get those introductions done fairly quickly and fairly directly so that you can take those and build the story. It's not really a race to the second act, but your first act needs to be pretty slippery, pretty buttery smooth. Next thing. If you're going to do chapters, keep them short. Short chapters, even if you have 40 or more of them, delightful, magically delicious. But keep your chapters short, and you can always have more of them. There's no magic number for the length of a middle grade book other than word count. But if you want to have 31, 42, 67 chapters, go to town. Make yourself happy. Next thing. Last point. You probably want to avoid the habit of what's called a constant cliffhanger. It's a misleading label, but a constant cliffhanger is a really bad habit in middle grade where instead of an action beat that resolves to move the story forward, there's always an imminent cliffhanger. We're always hiding from the evil zombie in the kitchen. We're always avoiding detection as we sneak out of detention. We're always seconds away from running a red light. There's always, oh my God, what are we going to do? Over and over and over and over again. You can't always cliffhang. The reader, I don't care how young they are, they won't buy it. They won't go for it long term because it starts to seem more and more unrealistic that they're always ending up in situations where these things happen. Limit the number of cliffhangers. Can I sneak in one more for you? Can I sneak one more middle grade thing for you? Really, really, really be careful with the length of your dialogue and the number of exclamation points you use. It's going to be less than you think. Kids speak in short sentences that do not give a shit about grammar and without anywhere near the exclamation points most adults assign to them. Most of the time, the thing that gives that kid yelling on the playground projection is the verb, the dialogue verb, the speech tag, not the exclamation point. Don't let your punctuation do the majority of the heavy lifting for middle grade fiction. Yeah, you can use them. Use them sparingly. They are croutons in your salad, not the whole damn thing. But when in doubt, make sure your verb is clear, your verb is direct, your verb is evocative, and your middle grade fiction will pick up pace and come across pretty smoothly. What an awesome question. Thank you. Here's another. I always get stuck at the 30,000 word mark. How do I move on? It's a plot issue. If you're always getting stuck at the same spot, you're always more or less getting stalled out at 30,000 words, it's because you're not plotting a big enough story with enough challenge. The same is also true if you're getting stuck at 10 or 20 or 40,000 words. You're failing to make the turn into larger fiction. So at roughly about the 10 to 20,000 word mark, you should be well established into your characters and well established into your plot. Sort of like how in a movie, by the time you get to the 20-minute point, you should know where your plot is. Same thing is true. By the time you get to 30,000 words, you should be well on the way to developing and building a slower paced story. If you're getting stuck at 30,000 words, but you're flying, like you're racing to the end and you're stuck at 30,000, it's because you're not developing the story slowly enough. If you get stuck at 30,000 words and it feels like nothing is happening, it's because you are dragging out you're stretching the span between the action beats, between the important plot points. You are thinning things out by stretching it too long. It's a plot and construction issue. The premise is probably fine. Here are two characters. Here is the conflict they have. The idea, the concept is probably not the issue. What's probably the issue is that you haven't thought further ahead on the premise. All right, I have two characters. They're magical. They're going to go on an adventure. Great premise. No problem. But what is that adventure? What obstacles, more than one, are they going to run into? What challenges do they bring to that story, to that adventure, independent of the obstacles they face? Why aren't they perfect people? How can we explore that imperfect space? It's just an organization issue, and you stall out because generally you should have thrown this fuel onto the fire. We should be getting into character arc. We should be getting into how a character feels. We should be getting into what they're doing beyond just sticking to the main plot. You got to be willing to expand your story, add more meat to it, take your time and slow down. And over time, with practice, you will bust through 30,000 words. And if you're worried, if your knee-jerk reaction is, oh my God, John, it's just going to be really slow. No, it won't. Take your time. Yes, obviously take your time. And it'll feel slow because you're used to a different pace, but it's not the end of the world. But if you're getting stuck at 30,000 words, you're not planning out enough. You're not presenting enough challenge. Good questions. Delightful questions. Any others? Else, we will move on. There's a question about death coming for all my goth friends. I don't think it's next. I think it's like question 8 or 9. But goth friends, hello, it's coming. Other questions, though? I'm chugging more water. Oh, man. These are great questions tonight. Thank you so much for them. On we go, then. Question 7. What are 2 new pieces of media that I could watch to help reinvigorate my creativity? Oh, I get to do some plugs. I love plugs. Here we go. Okay. This one is for my U.S. Canada people. I don't think this is available in Europe. No, I'll amend that. I don't think it's available through the usual channels in Europe. You can always acquire this, me hearties. Yar. You can always get your hands on it. But I'm going to introduce you to a thing that I think is going to really move some people. There was a show on Hulu called The Bear. It's really short. It's 25-minute episodes. It's about 4 hours total. You could watch it in an afternoon. It is an amazing character study. It is an amazing story well told in a small space. And it teaches you a lot about how to write characters and how to tell an effective story in a really small scale, because it just takes place in one restaurant with one group of people. Absolutely, positively, one of my highest recommendations. And it's a quick watch. Really quick. The dialogue's strong. It's beautiful to look at. It's well color graded, it's well shot, it's well edited. It looks amazing. The stories are really engaging. Yeah, there's a few spots where, it'd be great if there were another 2 episodes, and it'd be great if it was, an hour longer. But it is what it is. Go watch The Bear. It's on Hulu. It's pretty great. Item number 2. Not on Hulu. Different thing entirely. I'm going to give you a podcast. Now, I'm going to give you a podcast with a little bit of like a caveat, because I can tell you right now, this podcast is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but it's interesting. Okay. There's a podcast called Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff. Yes. It's a semi-history kind of podcast, but it's cool, interesting history. It's, people you've probably never heard of, doing things you've probably never heard of, or situations you maybe only kind of sort of know, and it goes into some detail. It is a remarkably well-researched and well-organized way of presenting a story, entirely in audio. You can just pop this thing on in the background. Yeah, there are some ads, but they're short. But it will... Whereas The Bear is a very character-driven, sense data, visual, audio, not exactly a deep thinking level thing, but it's certainly an engaging piece of media. Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff. It's a podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff will get you thinking. And it will get you thinking not only about how weird and strange history can be, but also how to organize story in the abstract, in your head, in the theater of your mind. I think 2 of those things, I think that can be a big boost to sagging or waning creativity. And they're just enjoyable. Thanks for letting me plug stuff. Oh, it's the goth question. We're here. This is so great. What happens to my books? Question 8. What happens to my books after I die? And what can I do to prepare or help my loved ones after I die? Okay, we're going to talk about literary estates. This topic is usually lethally dull. I'm going to try and make it sound exciting. Here we go. Okay, you're dead. It's maybe a bummer. You're dead. Other people, though, are going to need to know what to do with your stuff. And I don't just mean like, what do we do with grandma's favorite blanket? I'm talking about the material you're producing. Because if you're producing digital content, it doesn't matter if you're dead or not. That stuff's still generating some money, still generating some stuff, because the algorithm is forever. So here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to know. You need to make sure that other people, I don't know who that might be, presumably people you give a shit about, a spouse, a business partner, a loved one of some kind, parent, somebody who, will outlive you, exist past you. You've got to give them access to the account. I don't mean like put their name on it, but at least give them the password so that they could, access these things and take the money and then put it into a bank account. There is nothing more frustrating post-mortem than realizing that there's this whole legion of paperwork, this whole legion of accounts, this whole pile of digital stuff with nobody to have any access to it. Make sure one of the things you can do to better prepare people for the shuffling off of the mortal coil, make sure somebody somewhere who isn't just you has access or means to get those things wrapped up, organized, posted, whatever. write out the directions. Here's how you're going to send a newsletter out describing the fact that I'm dead. Here's the account information you need to close this Amazon thing or close this other thing. Here's the bank account information so that, you know, when you go to the bank and present my death certificate, they can sort that stuff out. The thing I'm dancing around, one, I'm not a lawyer. I've hung out with lawyers. I've partied with lawyers. I've done terrible things, pantsless with lawyers. But I myself am not a lawyer and do not consider myself a legal expert. So I cannot speak to the full extent of estate law in this case. What I can talk about, though, is if you have managed to organize your writing and organize your creative financial outlets, that's the money you make from your creative efforts, if you've managed to put those things into some kind of reasonable thing, I don't know, maybe like a little notebook or maybe a file, a shared notes on your phone. I would write it down and print it out. But as long as you've given some kind of directives, some kind of easy to access stuff, then no matter the amount of will, probate, etc. in place, you'll be able to at least have somebody manage that stuff. There's also the idea that even after you're gone, that money still comes in. You can still sell books posthumously. Loads of authors sell books and they've been dead for centuries. And what happens is the estate and or the publisher, well, they take that money. Sometimes they split it, sometimes not. It depends on the situation. You can work that out while you're not dead. It's a lot easier to do when you're not dead. But by and large, the best things you can do from just a single author, single worker, creative person is make sure somewhere you have the instructions and the materials and the passwords and everything so that in the event of your demise, somebody has a way of getting that known so that people aren't like wondering where the hell you are, and so that your legacy, digitally or otherwise, either has the means to kind of expire along with you, or it has the ability to sustain past you. You know, are you going to keep your author Facebook? Is your spouse going to keep your author Facebook page open upon your demise? And allow people to, years later talk about how they discovered your books one day and it really moved them. Who knows? But those are the decisions you need to make in terms of what happens as you're on your way out the door, so to speak. While you were in the middle of buying the farm, this is the shit to think about. Or, just like randomly on a Wednesday afternoon, write all that shit down. That's what I do. Beyond that, in traditional publishing cases, your publisher will probably assume possession of your books. Unless the contract has explicit language describing how, your estate will take over, the publisher will probably step in there because they'll see it as an opportunity to make money. And publishers love money. So they'll probably step in there, and then your spouse, partner, loved ones, etc. will have to argue with a publisher for some amount of time to straighten that shit out. Make sure you speak to an actual legal person and not just a dude in a t-shirt to get you the help you need to specifically language and structure your stuff so that, the ability for your work to last forever and be a source of income doesn't entirely go to line the pockets of people who don't need your help lining pockets. Okay? Now, there was a question. This sounds like an opportune time to ask whether or not a self-published author should consider an LLC and what are various considerations. Yeah, that's a great question. Here you go. Here are some considerations. One, it can be expensive. And for a lot of self-publishing authors, it's several $100s that maybe they don't have. Or it's a number of paperwork or an amount of material you have to produce that you don't have access to. For any number of reasons. You don't have a copy of this certificate. You don't have evidence of this. You don't have evidence of that. It can be a self-made obstacle in filing for an LLC, whether that's in the United States per state or internationally or whatever. It's a thing to consider. There's always a process wherever you are for establishing that LLC. And I'm going to tell you, somebody at some point is going to want some money for it because, God forbid, it just be straightforward and easy. So, consideration number one, can you weather the expense to set it up? If you can, great. It is not necessary to do so. You can still be just a plain old person with a plain old identifying number to produce your own work and make your own money. You can just be you and do that stuff. It's fine. You do not need an LLC all the time. For some people, in some cases, it's a very useful thing, like when they're trying to insulate themselves or their families from their efforts creatively. Like, let's say you tank it as an author. Let's say it is a huge, colossal waste. Let's say you throw, $10,000 to $30,000 basically in a hole. Like, it just falls apart. And rather than have that bankruptcy or those losses affect your family overall, and then it's on your kids to bail you out with it, you can wrap that all up in an LLC and let that be a businessy issue rather than a personal issue. And it allows you to separate your personal finances from your business finances in case you totally screw everything up like I did. Other consideration. Just because you have an LLC, some people take that as this sign they have to fix their shirt and come up here and talk about it in terms of it being a business. It doesn't give a shit. If you really want to do it for financial reasons. Do it because setting it up helps better distinguish the streams of income and give you a bit of personal versus corporate protection. Don't do it. Do not do it if you're thinking it's going to somehow make you legit, or it's somehow going to improve the quality of your writing, or turn you into a real boy Pinocchio, or any nonsense like that. An LLC is there as a business thing to insulate your business decisions. It has nothing to do with your ability to write. You can always form an LLC later. You don't have to start one first and then do the writing. You can always go write some shit and then later form an LLC. There's just extra paperwork to do, but it's still the same process. Depending on what else you want to do. If you just want to crank out some books and sell them and then take the money and buy some ice cream, you don't need an LLC. If you're looking to do more than just produce books, an LLC might be something to look into. But again, not a legal expert. I'm a dude in a t-shirt. But by and large, most of the time, it's not going to afford you any extra copyright protection or anything. It doesn't suddenly make your books better. It's a business. It's okay. For a long time, I was not an LLC. For half my life in business. I was just me. And there is a business. It runs some things over here off to the side, but by and large, I'm still me. It just happens. But it is not a requirement for this job. It is not a requirement for this field. And I know a lot of people love to turn it into one. It's okay. You can do just fine. It's not going to suddenly open more doors or make you more attractive to traditional publishing or anything. If anything, a lot of those traditional publishers will make fun of you. It's sort of like the kid who shows up to summer camp in the khakis and the dress shoes and carrying the little valise rather than just coming and hanging out. It's a little weird. Good question, though. On we go. The question that deflates me. What is the most frustrating part of marketing for writers? Well, I'm assuming this question is talking about what writers think the most frustrating part of marketing is, and it's not asking me my experience as somebody who occasionally markets for writers what the most frustrating part is, but I'm going to answer both of these questions. So, in general, most writers struggle in marketing in two avenues. One, they refuse to grow the pool to whom they market. Now, maybe they're intentionally refusing, like they stamp their foot, I'm not doing it. Or maybe they don't realize right off the bat that they're working in a closed system, but they end up working in a closed system that doesn't grow and has no chance for growth. And I'm looking at you people who want to market your book to the hashtag writing community as if that's suddenly going to burst your, the doors wide open. It's not. You're all authors. The majority of your readers are not on the hashtag writing community, and it's ridiculous for you to think so. You've got to be willing to grow the ways and the means by which you market. Sometimes it's just going to come down to you spending money. Sometimes it's going to come down to you taking big risks and spending money. Sometimes it's going to come down to you spending money and taking risks and trying several things that do or don't work. One of the most frustrating parts here for writers is that they refuse to do that because they're cheap or they're poor or both, or they're just, like me, stubborn. Because here's the other part that's frustrating. Marketing is a routine. It's a habit. It's a thing. Just like writing. Except when we were writing, when we were making up our story, it was fun. Oh boy, howdy, it was so much fun. I was talking about the dragon and the wizard and the little castle and the thing and the this and the that, and it was so creative, and I was doing whatever the fuck I wanted, whenever the fuck I wanted to do it, and it was just delightful. But marketing sounds like a job. Marketing sounds boring. Marketing is dull. Marketing is the same thing repeated over and over. It's not. It doesn't have to be. But all of a sudden, marketing is made to be the diametric opposite of that creative thing that we're talking about. I don't know how the fuck that happened. Well, no, I do. It's capitalism. But marketing doesn't have to just be, it's 10:30. Here is my 10:30 marketing tweet. I am now one step closer to death. It doesn't have to be that. Not at all. Marketing is just telling people that your thing is available. Now, maybe that's an active telling, like you're sending out a newsletter or you're promoting it on an ad or something. Or maybe it's an indirect or passive telling, like you're just slapping up a billboard or, you've put out stickers and merch and shit. Whatever. But it's a routine thing. It's a skill. It's a set of muscles, just like being creative. It's a different set of muscles, but in the same way, you can train these muscles. You can get better at this. And if you stop telling yourself that, marketing's boring or gross or sleazy or whatever, you'll have a lot better time doing it. So we could summarize all this with the most frustrating part of marketing for writers is the headspace, the thinking, how we perceive marketing to be. It's just talking to people about your stuff. Why do you keep talking to the same 15 people about your stuff? There's loads of other people out there. You just got to go make an effort to go talk to them. Now, let's answer the other question the other way around. As somebody who comes up with marketing campaigns for writers, what's the most frustrating part? The resistance. The resistance when I make a proposal. Hey, you should go do this. Try this. Use these words. Use this thing. Literally, I'll write it out for you if you want me to. And then I do, and then you don't do it. It's frustrating, not because, oh boy, howdy, I really wish you used my words because I like hearing my words. It's because I just gave you something that would help you and you decided not to use it. That's kind of shitty. But I get resistance with these things. Hey, have you thought about, not constantly tweeting your sales link to the hashtag writing community? Have you thought about, just not doing that or coming up with a different tweet or both? Have you thought about maybe starting a newsletter and capturing some email addresses? Have you thought about not just complaining about everything on Facebook or Discord? Possibly, maybe. And that resistance of like, yeah, I know. And then they still don't do anything about it. That for me is the most frustrating part because I'm guilty of it. I'm terrible at marketing. There's a reason why I'm only talking to half a dozen people right now. I'm terrible at this. It's a skill I have. Like if you were to say, hey, John, go market something that isn't yours, fine, let's do it. Tell me your budget. Tell me how little or big it is, whatever. If it's not me, I'll knock that shit out of the park. I don't even doubt it. But the minute it turns into me, I got doubts the size of skyscrapers because I know me. This is what I deal with. I'm my own worst enemy for these things. Do I have answers to this question? No, not yet. I'm working on it. That's why I'm in therapy. That's why I'm friends with people who are better marketers who can sit there and both nudge me along but also help me out. But over time, it still comes down to, what's in here, how I think about it, how I feel about it, and then what I'm going to do about it after the fact. No, it's totally fine. It was really nice to see you. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. You're always welcome back. Thanks for coming. Good times. All right. Shall we march on? Because I still have more water to drink and more tea to drink. Are there any questions? I promise the next questions are nicer. Oh, man. All right. Shall we move on? I'm just quick checking. Yep. All right. On we go. I just wanted to make sure there weren't any questions lingering in my DMs. Question number 10. Are you ever going to run out of questions to answer? No. I always have this fear that I'm going to repeat myself. And I do go back through my list of questions and make sure, like, within 6 or 7 chats, I haven't said the same thing. But that's mainly because I don't want to conflict with my previous answers. Because if it's been 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and you ask me the same question, I'm going to give you the same-ish answer, but it won't be delivered the same way. And for some people, that really, fucks them up. It's really a problem for some people because, you said this 8 weeks ago. Dude, it was 8 weeks ago. I barely remember. I got a great memory, but I don't remember literally every word I said on a Wednesday evening. It's on YouTube. Go watch it. What do you want me to say? But in terms of accumulating questions, I got a whole steno pad totally full of just line after line questions. And I'm always, if you're on the Discord, which is accessible through the Patreon, patreon.com/John helps you write better. You can get to the Discord through there. You can fill my day with questions. I will often ask you, do you want your answer now or do you want your answer on a Wednesday? But you can just fill that shit with questions. Go to town. I don't care if you think the questions are dumb or you're worried I've answered them a million times. Ask them. I love questions. I love this. I'm not crazy about me on camera, but I do love answering questions. So, awesome. Will I ever run out of questions? No. Some questions are more fun than others. Some questions are more technical than others. But I swear to you, I am filled with questions everywhere. I got a whole room full of notepads with questions. So no, I will never run out of questions. And if I did, for whatever reason, I'll just start teaching more individual topics. Question number 11. What are the bare minimum essentials needed for an author website? Okay. Ready? I'm going to give you a list. Okay. 1, you need some sort of domain. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be your own name.com. You could do it for free on Blogger or WordPress. That's fine. You just need to have some place where you can drive people's attention and traffic. Somewhere. Could be a Facebook group. Could be a Facebook author page. Could be a website. Could be a blog. Could be an Instagram account. Could be, you just got to have something. Okay? So that's the first thing you need. Overall, if we are specifically talking about a website, you need the following. 1, some way listed on that site to contact you. Some way. It doesn't have to be like a postal address or anything, but a social media account of some kind, an email address of some kind, some tool that somebody can use to connect with you for correspondence, be it just people hanging out wanting to chat or professional things like publishers or somebody want to when you send you something. You need to be accessible. There's no way around that. Now, the nice thing is you can control that. So if you want to come up with a rando generic Gmail, great. You want to come up with a Twitter account that's, fine. It doesn't need to be, this is my real name and this is my real address. And you don't have to do that. It can be whatever you want. You just need some way of having other humans correspond with you. Totally under your control, totally available for you. Next thing you need to indicate on this site what it is you're doing, what the point is. You can't just slap your email address up on some weird blog and just call it a day. You're an author. You're a writer. What are you writing? How's it going? Do you have covers? Can I buy your thing? All that sort of material describing what it is you're doing and making it available for purchase need to be there. If it's not there yet, because, you're still writing it, what information can you give me to encourage me to buy it when it is available? Do you have a sign up for a newsletter? Do you have a link to a pre-order on some website I can, purchase in advance? Do you have little snippets or a downloadable thing that I can, get into while I wait until your book is ready? Like, what are you giving me? What are you offering me, the consumer, so that I know to pay attention, to come back here to make a sale? That's it. All the other stuff, Facebook group, Discord community, merch, random blog, all that stuff is nice, but not critical. The bare bones essential, some means of connecting and corresponding, some development or description of what it is you're doing, some way of whatever you're doing and making it available to others for purchase. That's it. That's what you need. If you have those things, anything else on top is gravy. Great question. It's the last one of the evening. How do I bring much needed organization to a disorganized Facebook group? Okay. A small note here. The original question for this was like 300 words long. I trimmed it down to the very last sentence because we don't need the big preamble. Suffice to say, it's a very disorganized, very cliquish Facebook group with lots of different people over here who disagree with lots of little people over there who disagree with this group over here, and nobody really seems to be doing anything about it. So here's what you do. Come here, right here. Look at me. You need to establish a unifying reason for why people are there. If you're there to talk about, an author and their books, or to talk about publishing as a whole, or to talk about one specific kind of publishing, or to talk about just writing in general, or talk about writing in specific, you need to find and declare and make clear to everybody that, hey, if you're in this space, we're staying in this sphere. We're staying in in this ballpark. We're talking about this stuff. Anything that isn't in there, you can either ignore, which is not the best, but you can, or be more proactive and eliminate it, delete it. Remember, we're bringing organization to disorder, so it's going to get a little messy, and some feathers are going to be ruffled. But what you're trying to do here is, no matter the state of this disorganized group, you're going to make it organized. This might mean people select or self-select out. Oh, I don't like the vibe here anymore. Great. Go away. I'll see you later. You should be okay with that. You need to be okay with that, because the people who leave once you declare what the group is and what you declare the group isn't, and once you start monitoring and managing that, the people who leave were not interested in sharing your vision. Clear? Because now we're going to add to it. So step 1, define what the group is and define what the group isn't, and then start making clear what is acceptable behavior from unacceptable behavior. Here's what we're starting to add. You get to determine your level of response to the unacceptable behavior. I'm going to tell you from experience, harsh is okay. Not everybody on the internet needs to be your friend. Not everybody on the internet's going to be your friend. You don't need everybody to like you to make decisions. If you need to come down like a stack of bricks on somebody who's clearly disinterested in following whatever rules you have because it means they're no longer very special and under a spotlight, so be it. If this means you need to like tell people who you genuinely give a shit about, like, hey, knock that shit off, we're trying to do something here, and it might strain your relationship, you have to. You're trying to harness and focus people in such a way that they're aligned for a common good and aligned towards a common goal. And if you focus on that and demonstrate that you were doing that and start so let's say you've got a group where you're just talking about working on your first draft, right? Like everybody in the group agrees that I'm here to talk about my first draft. So you're going to start not letting people in the door if they're not doing that. Or people who want to start talking about, oh, I saw this TV show and I read this thing. Nope, cut that off, because we're here to talk about our first draft. And if you demonstrate that you are there to talk about that, you promote the fact that you're there to talk about it. When somebody does the thing you want them to do, you reward it with attention, time, and response. Hey, this is a great post. I'm so glad to see this thing about first drafts. Does anybody else want to share or comment? Whereas you don't engage, or you more actively don't engage and remove the stuff that doesn't share the vision, your group will get organized in a big goddamn hurry. It doesn't require a lot of preamble. It's a Facebook group. It does not have to be a democracy. I run a Discord community. It is not a democracy. It is at best a commune. And at worst, a refuge with a very simple set of rules. Don't fuck up other people's shit. I trust you to be an adult. And if you can't, there's the door. Real simple. I have no interest in playing internet police. I have no interest in babysitting. We're here to work, so we work. And there's a little space set aside for not work, and people love it, and it's delightful. There are memes. It's great. But by and large, you're in this space to work. If you want to go fuck around, we go fuck around somewhere else. Those are the rules. I made them clear. Everybody agrees. If you were to ask them, they'll tell them to you, not out of some cultish, slavish devotion, but just because the rules are really clear. The clearer your rules, the easier it is to follow them. The latitude you give is pretty straightforward. Like I have no tolerance for nonsense, so there isn't any really. And since the door, I've got a good handle on the door. You only get in if you're on the Patreon or a client, or you get invited in. Since I have a good handle on the door, and the world isn't just rushing in to do whatever, I don't need to worry about excessive moderation. I don't need to worry about inappropriate content, because we're not here for that. You can do much the same thing in a Facebook group, even if it's open door, even if you'll just let any old people through. You can control this. You really can. You just need to make some tough decisions and stay focused. And then reward the good behavior and nix the bad, and over time, it will change. I promise. Okay? Great question. That's the wrong button. Are there any other questions, issues, comments, etc.? Let me go back to the big giant screen. Anybody? Anything else? We will get out of here, and I will post this stuff to the podcast feed, and then to YouTube, and we will go off out of our way. Other issues, comments. It was nice to be back. Felt a little messy. Not my best, but we'll get there. We'll get back on track. Give me another week. As I keep chugging water. Oof. Okay? Are we good? Everybody? Seems like we're good. Let's get out of here. To the outro. Oh, you like the one on perfection? Thank you. I really appreciated it. Thanks. That means a lot. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. Check out our new glorious end screen, right? Everything is now underneath the John Helps You Write Better umbrella. If you're on the newsletter, which is available over at writernextdoor.com, there's a pop-up. Sign up for that newsletter, and you will be notified right away when the switch over to johnhelpsyourwritebetter.com happens. If you want details for more of that, go hit the Discord, which is accessible through the Patreon, patreon.com/johnhelpsyouwritebetter. And as always, everything will be available over on the podcast feed and on YouTube in minutes. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Please take care of yourself, take care of other people, and tell them that you love them. Do your best to love yourself. Please know that you're worth it. You're always worth it. All power to all people. I genuinely wish you well. I hope you're doing okay. Stay hydrated, stay happy, stay strong, stay pleasant. And I will talk to you next when we see each other next. Let's see, it'll be next week, which will be July the 18th. No, I don't know what the topic will be, but we'll find out. So I will see you next week for more. Until then, take care of yourselves. And I'll talk to you guys very, very soon. See ya!